Welcome to Anglo-Romani with Pricey. I'm Pricey, and this is the series where I take a look at the Anglo-Romani paralanguage slash dialect that I grew up with and sort of use it as a lens for looking at sort of Romani history more broadly. In this particular episode, I'm taking a look at terms for nature, I guess, like natural terms, not animals per se. I didn't really know what to name this one, so I'm just calling it nature and being done with it. I also want to mention something which came up in a recent live stream and I mentioned is that this series was never going to be like a permanently sort of ongoing thing, and I feel like this series is now coming to a point where it's going to be wrapping up sort of between now and summer. But then going forward, I will still continue to make this series in a different capacity, perhaps one where I'm looking at words and terms not found specifically in my family, but maybe in the comment sections of these videos or indeed further afield. With that being said, let's get into this. But before I get into this video properly, there are a couple of things I want to mention from a recent conversation with my dad. That is the word, I think he said it was kite for wind, posh for grass, and goodly for snow. Now, if you watched my video, I think it was food 1, then you know that goodly is sugar. And so I think it is really a case of sort of white powdered stuff being used across two different terminologies. I also wonder if this applies to other white powders, but in any case, in my dad's family when he was growing up, he knew snow as goodly. This is not something that I myself grew up with. That is a pretty cut and dry one. Kite and posh were interesting because I was not able to find any other examples of families using these, but I, especially in the case of kite, feel like the connotation is right there in the English word kite, referring to something you fly, and posh, it gets used in a bunch of places, and the closest I could find was pub. But I'm going to come back to that one at some point, I think, when I've had a chance to research it some more. The first word I want to talk about today is actually one which solves a big mystery that I've had for several months now. Occasionally I'll come across a word that I wasn't sure if I knew or not, but it's one that my dad just sort of went straight off like the top of his head with when I asked him about it. And then as soon as he says it, like I'm suddenly remembering like little moments here and there where he said it. This is one of those occasions where I feel like he may have said it once or twice when talking about, say, cutting turf or rotavating. And that is the word chik, meaning mud. In any case, once he said it, I felt like I remembered this word quite well, and indeed, looking into the Romany project led by Yaman Matras from the University of Manchester, I was able to confirm that this word indeed means mud, as well as, depending on family, earth, dirt, ashes, soil, that kind of thing. Discovering the link between chik and dirt in particular was very exciting for me, as if you remember from adjectives 1, if you've already seen that, I was struggling to find the origins of the word chikly. The only link I found was one that gave it the suffix elo, and once I got that, I was like, oh okay, it's the condition of being dirty. The elo part referring to the condition of being. So that at least like clears up one mystery of a word before, but you will see in this video that I actually have a whole new mystery to work out. But right now, let's talk about the origin of chik itself, just the first part of that word, chikly. The closest relative I could find to the Romani word chik meaning mud is actually, funnily enough, the Palula word Chik, meaning manure. Now, Chik is a teeny tiny little language that is not very well researched and has less speakers than just Romany in the UK alone, about 10,000 to be precise, found in a couple of valleys in Pakistan. But it does tally up, and while this language is not particularly well researched, there is speculation as to where the Palulan word, if that's the right sort of demonym, Chik came from, and that is to say that Chik, as well as by extension Chik, potentially from Romany, comes from the Sanskrit word chika, meaning dry mud. In a previous video talking about expressions, I talked about the term kushti divas and explained that divas was our word for day and talked about the origins of that word. Well, continuing along that theme, let's talk about the term for night. Rati is not a word that I remember growing up with much at all, but means night, and as soon as I heard it, I just knew that this one definitely had an Indian origin, and indeed it links back to the Sanskrit Ratri, and Ratri has so many descendants as well as the Romani Rati that this is easily in the running for being perhaps the most spread word that I could find across the entire sort of Indian subcontinent and then some. From Sri Lanka to Nepal to the borders of Afghanistan to an elegant way of saying evening in Thailand, this word is everywhere. Looking specifically at the Romani word Rati, this follows the trend of a lot of Dardic languages actually found in the northwest of India of dropping that second R after the T sound. So you get a Rata or something along those lines, or just Rat. But in keeping the E sound at the end, it coincidentally ends up being the Romani word Rati, meaning night, has a very similar sound, coincidentally, as a lot of languages of northeast India, such as Assamese, Bihari, and Odia. So I've already talked about how I've managed to solve a big mystery as to a word origin that I have been trying to work out for months now, perhaps even the better part of a year. That being chikli, meaning dirty. Had no idea, finally came across an answer looking at a totally different word. Well, now I'm back in the same situation immediately where I am looking at a word where I just cannot place the origins of it at all, at least not in any kind of academically satisfactory way, and I'm hoping that someone out there may be able to help me. When I asked my dad specifically if there was a word for morning recently, he was able to give me the word Sala, and this I thought was going to be quite an easy find. I looked in Yaron Mattress's book Romany in Britain, I think that's what it's called, it'll be on the screen if it's not called that, and I was able to find a link very quickly in there that said that he speculates that it's a hangover from Romany interactions with Greek speakers. And it's interesting because in this chapter he also talks about suffixes quite a lot that have come from Greek, from Byzantine Greek in particular. And so he could be referring to that, but if so, the only place that I can see this as having come from is Turkish or potentially Arabic by extension, sabah, meaning morning in those languages. So it's potential that sabah was picked up and then given a suffix that has come from Byzantine Greek, but this is purely speculation on my part. Like I say, if you know the answer to this one, please do let me know. In my most recent video, Animals 2, I explained that I would be taking a closer look at the word for squirrel, or at least dissecting the word for squirrel in an upcoming video. And that is what has led me to today talking about this word and then inspiring the rest of the video surrounding it. In my family, squirrel is, I think, Jokl Rukka, or it might be Rukka Jokl. In any case, this means tree dog as a literal translation. And in other families, I believe Rukka Mengri is used. Mengri, I think I've talked about it a little bit at some point, but I can't remember where. But today we're looking at Rukka, meaning tree. Again, this isn't one of those words that I specifically remember growing up with, but as soon as I mentioned Rukka to my dad, he instantly knew that I was talking about tree. Now, funnily enough, I've already talked a teensy bit about Rukka in a previous video talking about verbs 1 specifically. And that is because the word Rukka had a very ambiguous tale as to how it ended up being used in Anglo-Romani, meaning to speak. And there were 3 particular theories that were put forward. One of those theories, perhaps the most stringent one, but also the most fun one, was that there was a similar sounding word to puka, which means to tell, which was Rukka, and at some point there was a confusion that happened somewhere along the migration, and by the time we got to Britain, we end up with the word Rukka, which doesn't sound quite the same but close enough, meaning to speak. Well, unlike Rukka, which could have had one of many different sort of roots to its contemporary word, roots between its contemporary word and the past, Rukka is much more simple, going back to Sanskrit Ruksa via the Sauraseni Prakrit Rukka. All of this meaning tree the whole way along. This one is a very well-known word, appearing on many lists of English words that originated in Romany. Kosh in British English sort of slang, kind of slang, I think it's always slang, but it might have been appropriated in certain areas, is another word for a truncheon or a battering ram kind of thing. Maybe not like for knocking down doors, but a truncheon, a blunt weapon, a club. In Romany, this is simply a word for wood, and it comes from the continental Romany kasht and gets traced back very quickly to the Sanskrit kasta. I think that's how it's pronounced. It's got a lot of symbols around it, so feel free to correct me. All of which still means wood, going the whole way back. It's hard to say why I'm so familiar with this word, because it's not one I said a lot growing up, but like Kushti Divas and several other words that I've looked at in this series, dud is a word that, although I didn't say it, as soon as I see it, I just know they're referring to light. And it refers to all kinds of light, both light in the sky and light bulbs that you've got on around you. Incidentally, if you have a dud, it means that you have a working light bulb instead of a dud one. Being such an ubiquitous word, dud shows up in a lot of online dictionaries sort of between English and Anglo-Romani, or indeed Romani. But there is no mention of where this word came from, and this one ends up being in my list of ambiguous words, no, not quite as much of a headache as Sala earlier on. Yaron Matras himself has linked this word as far east as Polish Roma, in as much as they use the word also to mean light. But once again, I am forced to use something that ends up being quite a helpful resource, surprisingly, every single time. That being the French Wikipedia page for the Romani language. And indeed, when I scroll down to Lumiere, there I find alongside it the Sanskrit Jyota, meaning luster, brilliance, and light. The Sanskrit Jyota, meaning light, has a lot of links to contemporary Indian words, particularly Hindi, but it once again highlights, no pun intended, the need to look into the history of Romani words and how where the gap is basically between dud and Jota, because that is quite the change, apart from the fact that they both have a D sound in them. This next word I nearly put in my video for general places, as it goes pretty much hand in hand with an achintan, or in my experience, an oil drum in my parents' back garden. But as it happens, I didn't really feel too comfortable with my research of it at the time. I think I was kind of rushing it at the last minute, and I decided to save it until this video, where I was going to look at sort of general terms for like nature and stuff. I guess it kind of fits in with the classical element of fire, in as much as it also fits in as a campfire. As a noun, yog tends to refer specifically to a campfire, but it's up for debate depending on the family as to how they use it. And we're finishing today's video on a nice straightforward etymology. Yog comes from the continental Romany yag, which in turn can be traced back to the Saraceni Prakrit agi, and this word has a bunch of contemporaries in languages such as Hindi, Nepali, Gujarati and Punjabi. And with that, those are all of the terms for nature that I was able to find so far. Whether there'll be more to come up later, I don't know, but I will probably put them in a video of a different name, so I won't call it Nature 1, but just Nature for now. And with that being said, I'd love to hear your thoughts. If maybe you could clear up some of the missing gaps in my knowledge, particularly around the word Sala, but also, you know, what are your words for grass and wind? Because I'd be very interested to look into those words going forwards. In any case, feel free to check out the rest of my channel where I've done a lot more of this series, or just check out the series in general, should I say. But if you're into music discussion and retro gaming, plenty of that on this channel as well. I do quite the variety. In next week's video, I'm actually going to a concert and vlogging that, so that will be out very soon. And I'm also been doing a lot of stuff to do with chess recently. If any of this sounds interesting to you, then please do subscribe. Feel free to like this video, comment your thoughts, and until next time, have a good one.